Welcome to the third episode of our show, The Second Sex, where we explore Simone de Beauvoir's groundbreaking work and its lasting impact on feminist thought.
Great to be diving in again.
Today, we're really getting into the foundations.
Yeah.
We're tackling Destiny, Chapter 1, Biological Data, specifically pages 40 through 71.
Right. And it's important for you listening. We know this can get a bit technical maybe, but the Beauvoir is really setting the stage here for everything else.
Exactly.
Our goal is to make these early arguments, which can be challenging, really clear and show how they feed into her later thinking.
Yeah, so our mission, if you will, is to unpack how she initially saw biological factors feeding into this idea of women's destiny, how these points kind of pave the way for the bigger philosophical claims later on.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's dive in. De Beauvoir kicks off exploring this idea that woman is more than the male, is prey to the species. What's really at the heart of that statement?
Well, what's really key here is how she looks at human societies trying to get beyond just, pure biology. She suggests that with tools, men could kind of shift their focus from basic survival to actually shaping the world, engaging in projects.
Right, building, creating.
Exactly. And this, for her, seems to allow men to escape what she calls the species destiny. It's this early split that highlights a real tension. Society valuing things beyond just biological functions.
And the contrast with women is, well, it's pretty intense. She says motherhood left women riveted to her body like the animal. That's a powerful image.
It really is. Her argument is that reproduction, childcare, historically tied women much more closely to biology, in a way that men, through their outward-focused projects, seem to move past. And linking this up, de Beauvoir thinks humanity historically valued reasons for living over life itself.
Meaning over mere existence.
Precisely. And this thinking, she argues, leads man to set himself up as the master, dominant over woman, because his activities, his creations, are seen as generating that higher value, that meaning.
So it's this creation of value that trumps the sort of indistinct forces of life, as she calls them. And that ends up subjugating both nature and woman. It's a really foundational power dynamic she's sketching out.
Absolutely. It's fundamental.
But then how does she say that this initial situation, how did it carry on and change over centuries?
That's a huge question, and honestly, one she spends much of the rest of the book exploring.
Right.
But for now, she's establishing this core imbalance, rooted in this perceived difference in relating to biology. And right after this, she brings in that absolutely critical idea of woman as other. Can you unpack that a bit?
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets really foundational, I think. De Beauvoir says, man never thinks himself without thinking the other. And at first she says, this isn't even about sex or gender specifically.
Right, just a general duality.
Yeah, it's like a basic human thing. We define ourselves against something else. But the crucial step is when woman, seen as naturally different from man who posits himself as the same, gets pushed into that other category.
So man becomes the norm, the self.
Exactly. He's the standard.
Yeah.
And a woman is defined purely by how she differs from that standard.
Yeah.
It's like defining dark only in relation to light.
That's a good way to put it. And what's really interesting is how she traces this, showing woman initially just being part of a wider other group. She points to things like ancient Babylonian myths, where ocean and sea are like male and female aspects of cosmic chaos.
So the duality wasn't strictly gendered at first?
Not necessarily. It shows the other wasn't automatically female right from the get-go.
But then de Beauvoir tracks how, as the focus on fertility grows, woman increasingly comes to fill that whole space of the other. That's when we see the rise of, powerful female goddesses, right, the fertility cults.
Exactly that. Figures like the Great Goddess in places like Susa and Crete emerge.
Right.
And de Beauvoir notes their diverse forms, sometimes full-figured, stetopagus, sometimes thin, clothed, naked, and their symbols like the dove or the serpent. They ruled over everything. Heaven, the underworld, nature.
A powerful figure.
Definitely. But it highlights something tricky. Even when seemingly elevated, woman's power here is often tied directly to those biological roles that later are used to subordinate her.
And that links back to her idea of woman being associated with foreign nature, right? Like all the wild, powerful stuff of nature is somehow concentrated in women.
Yes, precisely. And that association creates this real ambivalence in how men related to women in those early societies. That's the next big point she tackles.
Okay, so there's respect, maybe even awe, because women are obviously vital for the clan's survival, kids, community, food.
Yeah, absolutely vital roles. But, and this is fascinating, that respect is mixed with fear.
Fear. Why?
Because those life-giving powers, they also seemed mysterious, maybe dangerous. So women often became taboo, linked with magic, sorcery. She even mentions women as priestesses, like the Druids, or sometimes having roles in tribal government, even leading.
Hmm. So not a simple picture of female power then. But she also describes a shift, doesn't she, towards patrilineal systems.
Yes, where women start depending more on male protection, religiously speaking brothers, husbands.
And the marriage customs.
eh,
Buying wives, exchanging goods. It sounds very
Well,
transactional.
it does underscore that. And connecting the dots, de Beauvoir sees patriarchal systems slowly taking over as men gain more self-awareness, assert their will.
Okay.
But here's a really crucial point she makes. Even when men were, quote, confused by the mysteries of life, nature, and woman, he never relinquished his power.
That's huge. So even when acknowledging women's power, her dangerous magic, it's still the man defining it, categorizing it. He makes himself essential by granting her that otherness.
Exactly. He realizes himself thereby as the essential in this alienation he grants. So despite her obvious importance, her fertility, her destiny in this framework is subordination, possession, exploitation, like nature itself. And any prestige women did have, de Beauvoir insists, came from men. Even the worship of a mother goddess was filtered through male consciousness, those powerful idols. They were still male inventions, ultimately dependent on men, which kind of paved the way for men to assert dominance as thinking evolved.
Which leads into the decline of women's status she describes next.
Yeah, and it's a pretty grim picture she paints.
She gives examples like exposing baby girls, infanticide, things showing female life just wasn't valued as much.
Right, even just accepting a daughter was seen as the father being generous, not the child having an inherent right to life.
And the details she uses are striking.
They really are, like the stain of birth being considered worse if the baby was a girl. She cites Leviticus, requiring twice the purification time for the mother.
Or the blood money, the compensation for death being lower if the victim was female, clearly shows a lower value.
Absolutely. And then there's the father's total power over his daughter, just handed over to the husband at marriage. It reinforces that idea of woman as property.
Yes, she literally lists women alongside slaves, animals, property.
Which then justifies things like polygamy for men, the right to just dismiss wives, while demanding absolute chastity from women.
And she contrasts that with, say, matriarchal societies where there was maybe more freedom, less focus on virginity, less harsh judgments.
She does. She argues the intense focus on virginity and total fidelity in patriarchal systems was really about ensuring inheritance rights, making sure the kids were his.
So a wife's infidelity becomes like treason against the lineage.
A crime of high treason, as she puts it, which got embedded in laws for ages. We see those legal double standards about adultery historically.
Yeah, so the overall trend is diminishing freedom for women under patriarchy, becoming property passed from father to husband, often without much say in it herself.
So if we pull back and summarize this first chapter, what de Beauvoir is doing is laying out how perceived biological facts interpreted through a male lens combine with these early social structures to really cement male dominance and this core concept of woman as the other.
And that concept, the other, became so incredibly influential later, didn't it? Especially for second-wave feminism, understanding power dynamics way beyond just gender.
Absolutely. It's a cornerstone.
So it really prompts you, the listener, to think, okay, how do these initial biological and historical arguments shape the rest of her analysis as she looks across different cultures and times?
And maybe also, how do these arguments about biology framed back then hold up today, given what we know now scientifically?
Good question.
Definitely. This look at biological data is really just the first step. It gives us the groundwork for understanding all the other layers, social, economic, historicals that she's going to unpack.
It sets the stage for exploring the complexities of women's situation, women's oppression.
Exactly.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on. If this initial branding as other is so deeply tied to these perceived biological differences, how can women actually move beyond that assigned role? How can genuine equality, real self-determination be achieved?
It's the central question, isn't it? Still incredibly relevant. And it's the question de Beauvoir wrestles with throughout this entire monumental work.